Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Easy English Spark channel. I'm so excited to have you here today. In today's video, we'll be diving into how you can improve your English listening and speaking skills, boost your confidence, and start speaking more fluently. We'll take a closer look at my journey and how using techniques like shadowing and thinking aloud really helped me. I can't wait to share these strategies with you. So let's get started and light up your English journey. Chapter 1: A New Beginning. Hello, my name is Selena, and I want to share my journey with you. It all started with a simple desire to improve my English. At the time, I wasn't confident in my language skills, but I knew that learning English would open doors for me. I was living in a busy city surrounded by people who spoke English fluently, and it made me realize how much I needed to improve. I remember the first time I really understood that speaking English would take me to the next level. It happened on a train ride one afternoon. The day was beautiful, and the sun was shining brightly through the windows of the train. As I sat quietly, looking out at the passing scenery, I noticed two women sitting across from me. They were chatting in English, and I couldn't help but listen closely. The way they spoke seemed so natural, so effortless. I could understand bits and pieces of what they were saying, but I couldn't fully follow their conversation. I began to feel frustrated. I had been studying English for some time, but I realized that I still had so much more to learn. My vocabulary was limited, and I struggled to form sentences without thinking too much about grammar rules. But in that moment, I made a decision. I would not let these challenges hold me back. After a few minutes, I gathered all my courage. I turned to the women and smiled nervously. I said, "Excuse me. Can I speak with you in English?" They looked at me, and to my surprise, they smiled warmly and nodded. At first, I struggled to find the right words. I tried to speak in simple English, knowing that I was a beginner. I said, "I am learning English, but I'm not good yet." The women were kind, and they immediately understood what I was trying to say. They spoke slowly and helped me out with some words I didn't know. It was such a relief. We talked for a few minutes, and during that time I felt a sense of accomplishment that I had never felt before. They encouraged me, telling me that the more I spoke, the better I would get. Before I knew it, the train reached my stop. It was time to say goodbye. I thanked the women for their kindness, and as we parted ways, they gave me their contact information. They told me I could reach out to them if I ever needed help with my English. That short conversation, only about 10 minutes long, had a huge impact on me. It reminded me that learning a language isn't just about memorizing words or studying grammar. It's about communicating, connecting with others, and pushing yourself to try even when you're not perfect. From that day on, I promised myself that I would practice speaking every chance I got. I didn't want to be afraid of making mistakes anymore. Instead of shying away from conversations, I would embrace them. I started speaking to anyone I could, even if I wasn't sure if my English was good enough. Slowly, I started to notice changes. I began to understand more when I heard people speak, and I felt more confident using the language. This was just the beginning of my journey, but it was an important first step. I realized that learning English wasn't something that happened overnight. It required dedication, practice, and most importantly, the willingness to make mistakes and learn from them. It's not always easy, but it's worth it. And if I could do it, so can you. Chapter 2: The Power of Practice. Welcome back. In the last chapter, I shared how I started my journey to learn English and the moment when I decided to take the leap and practice speaking, even if I wasn't perfect. In this chapter, I want to talk about the most important lesson I learned: the power of practice. After my first conversation with those women on the train, I felt a surge of motivation. I realized that if I wanted to improve my English, I had to do more than just study the grammar rules and memorize vocabulary. I needed to practice consistently, day in and day out. That's when I made a commitment to myself. I would practice English every single day, no matter how busy my life got or how many mistakes I made. At first, it wasn't easy. I had my doubts. I wasn't sure if I would see progress or if I was just wasting my time. But I pushed those thoughts aside and focused on one thing: consistency. I knew that by practicing every day, even for a small amount of time, I would improve over time. The key was not to expect instant results, but to stay committed to the process. I started by setting small goals for myself. Instead of aiming to speak perfect English right away, I focused on improving a little every day. Every morning, I set aside 15 minutes to review vocabulary that I had learned the day before. I found it really helpful to create flashcards with words and their meanings, and I would go through them during my breaks at work, while I was waiting for the bus, or before bed. But that wasn't enough. I knew I needed to hear English as much as possible to train my ear. So I started listening to English podcasts and watching movies in English, even if I didn't understand everything. The more I listened, the more my brain started to pick up on patterns, sentence structures, and new words. It wasn't always fun because I often felt lost or confused, but it was necessary. It was like exercising a muscle. At first, it's difficult, but with time, it becomes easier. I also started to speak out loud more often. I didn't have a conversation partner all the time, so I had to make do with speaking to myself. At first, it felt silly to talk to myself in English, but then I realized that self-talk is a powerful tool for language learners. I would describe what I was doing, what I saw around me, or what I was thinking in English. It didn't matter if I made mistakes. The goal was to speak, to practice. One of the biggest challenges I faced during this phase was fear. Fear of making mistakes. Fear of sounding foolish. But the more I practiced, the more I understood that making mistakes is actually a part of the learning process. The important thing was to not let my mistakes discourage me. Every mistake was an opportunity to learn and improve. To help me stay motivated, I joined an online language exchange group where I could practice speaking with other learners. Some people were native speakers, while others were learning just like me. We would schedule weekly calls and take turns speaking in English for 30 minutes at a time. At first, I was terrified. I was afraid they would judge me for my mistakes, but the reality was different. They were supportive, and the conversations became a great way for me to practice in a relaxed environment. Another thing that really helped me was journaling in English. Every day I would write a few sentences or a short paragraph about my day, my thoughts, or anything that interested me. It wasn't just about writing grammatically correct sentences. It was about practicing what I had learned. By writing, I could reinforce my vocabulary and sentence structure while also gaining confidence in expressing myself in English. I started to see results after about a month of daily practice. I was able to hold simple conversations without hesitating so much, and I felt more comfortable understanding spoken English. But it didn't stop there. The more I practiced, the better I got. I realized that practice isn't just about repetition. It's about creating a mindset of improvement. It's about learning to embrace the process and enjoy the little victories along the way. The most important lesson I learned during this time was that practice creates progress. No matter how small your steps are, as long as you are practicing regularly, you are moving forward. The road to fluency might seem long, but with consistency, you will get there. It's all about building momentum and keeping your focus on your goal. Looking back, I'm so grateful for the time I invested in practicing every day. It wasn't always easy, and there were days when I felt like giving up, but those moments of struggle were essential to my growth. So, if you're just starting your language learning journey, or if you've been at it for a while but are feeling stuck, Remember this: practice is the key. If you dedicate time to practice every day, even just for a few minutes, you will see results. It doesn't matter how small those steps are. Each one brings you closer to your goal. And remember, no matter how many mistakes you make, they're not setbacks. They're stepping stones toward improvement. Keep practicing, keep learning, and most importantly, don't give up. Chapter 3. Moving to London. Welcome back to my journey. In the last chapter, I shared with you how practice became the cornerstone of my progress in learning English. Now, I want to tell you about a huge step I took, one that truly changed everything for me. It was the moment I decided to move to London, the city where I would fully immerse myself in the English language and culture. I remember feeling both excited and nervous. London had always seemed like a dream destination for me. I had heard so many stories about its vibrant culture, its beautiful landmarks, and of course its role as a global center for learning. But as much as I dreamed about living there, I also knew that it wasn't going to be easy. I would be far away from home, away from everything familiar, and I would have to face the reality of living in a city where English was spoken everywhere. But I knew that if I wanted to truly master the language, I had to step out of my comfort zone. After months of preparation, the day finally arrived. I packed my bags, said goodbye to my family and friends, and boarded the plane to London. The flight was long, and my thoughts kept racing. I was filled with excitement, but also a bit of fear. Would I be able to handle everything on my own? Would I be able to communicate and make friends? Was my English good enough to live and work in an English-speaking country? All these questions ran through my mind, but I knew I had to keep moving forward. When I landed in London, the first thing that hit me was the sheer size of the city. The streets were bustling with people from all over the world. The buildings were towering, and the energy was electric. There was so much to take in, but I couldn't let myself get overwhelmed. I had a goal: to study English and improve my skills as much as possible, and I wasn't going to let anything stand in my way. I enrolled in a language school in central London, excited but nervous about my first day. The school had a great reputation, and I knew this would be the perfect place to continue my language learning. On my first day, I walked into the classroom and met my teacher, Mrs. Wilson. She was a warm, friendly woman with a smile that immediately put me at ease. She greeted us all and introduced herself, and I could tell from the very beginning that she was someone who was passionate about teaching. There were other students in the class, all from different parts of the world, and they all had their own stories of why they were there. Some wanted to improve their English for work, others for travel, and some, like me, simply wanted to become fluent. It was an exciting feeling to be surrounded by people who were just as eager to learn as I was. Mrs. Wilson wasted no time and began explaining her teaching philosophy. She told us that she didn't believe in using traditional textbooks that simply taught grammar rules and vocabulary lists. Instead, she believed that the best way to learn a language was to use it in real-life situations, to practice speaking, listening, reading, and writing as much as possible. I was immediately hooked by her approach. This was the kind of teaching I needed: practical, hands-on, and interactive. She explained that we would not just be sitting in class memorizing vocabulary and rules. Instead, we would engage in conversations, practice our listening skills through real-world audio materials, and write about our experiences. Mrs. Wilson emphasized that the more we immersed ourselves in the language, the more natural it would feel. It wasn't just about learning grammar, it was about learning how to live the language. After that first lesson, I was filled with a renewed sense of purpose. I knew that this was exactly where I needed to be. London was the perfect place for me to improve my English because it was full of opportunities to practice. Everywhere I went, I had to speak English. Whether I was ordering coffee at a cafe, asking for directions, or even chatting with new friends, I was constantly using the language. One thing that surprised me was how much the English spoken in London was different from what I had learned in textbooks. I had always learned the formal, textbook English. But here, I was hearing so many different accents and informal expressions. It was a bit of a challenge at first to keep up with the fast-paced conversations, but over time, I began to understand and even pick up some of the slang and local expressions. Outside of class, I made it a point to explore the city and interact with as many people as I could. I didn't want to be afraid of making mistakes anymore. Every time I went to a store, every time I spoke to someone on the street, I was practicing. I was listening, I was speaking, and I was getting better. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were moments when I felt overwhelmed and frustrated. Sometimes, I would find myself in situations where I couldn't find the right words, or I would misunderstand something someone said. There was also the constant challenge of adapting to a new culture. London was a beautiful city, but it was also very different from what I was used to. The people were friendly, but at times, I felt like an outsider. But I didn't let those challenges stop me. I kept reminding myself that this was part of the learning process. Every mistake was an opportunity to grow. Every new word I learned, every sentence I was able to say without hesitation was a small victory. Looking back now, Moving to London was one of the best decisions I ever made. It wasn't just about learning English. It was about immersing myself in a new culture, meeting people from all over the world, and challenging myself to step out of my comfort zone. It was about pushing past my fears and taking risks. London became my classroom, and the world around me was my teacher. In the next chapter, I will share with you how this immersive experience changed my understanding of the language and how it helped me grow not just as an English learner, but as a person. So stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next chapter of my journey. Chapter 4: Learning Through Conversations. Welcome back to my journey. In the last chapter, I shared how I made the life-changing decision to move to London to immerse myself in the language and culture. Today, I want to tell you about one of the most powerful ways I learned English: learning through conversations. Conversations were the key to improving my speaking and listening skills in a way that textbooks and grammar drills could never do. When I first arrived in London, I was nervous about speaking English. Sure, I had been studying the language for a while, but putting it into practice in real-world situations was a whole different challenge. I was living in a city where everyone spoke English, but I still felt self-conscious. Would they understand me? Would I be able to understand them? What if I made a mistake and embarrassed myself? But then I remembered something my teacher, Mrs. Wilson, told me on my first day. The best way to learn a language is to use it in real conversations. Don't be afraid to speak, even if you're not perfect. Every conversation you have is an opportunity to improve. Those words stuck with me, and I knew that if I wanted to get better at English, I had to face my fears and start speaking with others, no matter how nervous I felt. The first step I took was to practice speaking with my classmates in school. We would often pair up and talk about various topics. At first, I was hesitant, afraid I might make mistakes, but I quickly realized that my classmates were in the same boat. We were all there to learn, and we all made mistakes from time to time. It was normal. What mattered was that we kept trying and practicing. Slowly but surely, my confidence started to build. I began to understand that the more I spoke, the better I would get. One of my favorite activities in class was when Mrs. Wilson divided us into pairs and asked us to role-play different situations. For example, we would pretend to order food at a restaurant, ask for directions, or talk about our hobbies. These activities were not only fun, but incredibly helpful. By practicing these real-life situations, I started to feel more comfortable speaking in English. The more I practiced, the easier it became to form sentences and understand what others were saying. Outside of class, I made it a point to engage in conversations with native speakers as much as possible. I wasn't always confident, but I knew that every time I spoke to someone, I was learning something new. It could be something small, like a new word or a phrase that was commonly used in daily conversations. Sometimes it was learning how to understand someone's accent or how to ask a question more naturally. One day I was in a cafe, sitting alone, when a man sat down at the table next to me. He smiled and asked if the seat next to me was taken. I nodded and smiled back. Then he struck up a conversation, asking if I was a tourist or if I lived in London. I was a bit nervous at first, but I decided to take the plunge and speak with him. I told him that I had moved to London to learn English, and we started talking about how I was adjusting to the city. We talked for about 15 minutes, and even though I made some mistakes, he was very patient with me. He corrected me gently when I made errors, and I felt so grateful for that. It was during that conversation that I realized something important. Mistakes are not failures. They're opportunities to learn. That conversation with the man in the cafe gave me the confidence to speak more with strangers. I started to strike up conversations with people whenever I had the chance. Whether it was the cashier at the supermarket, a fellow commuter on the train, or a person I met while walking in the park, I made an effort to talk to as many people as I could. These daily interactions became an essential part of my language learning journey. One of the challenges I faced when speaking with native speakers was understanding their accents and the speed at which they spoke. London, being such a diverse city, has people from all over the world, and there are many different accents. Sometimes, I found myself struggling to understand certain words or phrases, especially when people spoke quickly. But instead of getting frustrated, I decided to embrace this as part of the learning process. Whenever I didn't understand something, I would politely ask them to repeat what they had said. Most people were more than willing to slow down or explain things in a simpler way. This made me realize that asking questions is not a weakness, but a sign of being proactive in learning. Over time, I became more comfortable listening to different accents and speaking to people from all walks of life. I learned that there is no perfect way to speak English. People have different styles of speaking, and understanding their context and intentions is what matters most. I also began to notice something else. The more I conversed with people, the more I started to sound more natural. My sentences became more fluid, and I didn't have to think as much about the words before I spoke. English started to feel more like a part of me, rather than something I was constantly trying to learn. In addition to improving my speaking skills, I found that these conversations also helped me with my listening skills. Listening to others speak, especially in casual real-world settings, helped me understand the rhythm of the language. I could pick up on how native speakers used contractions, how they blended words together, and how they used colloquial expressions. This was knowledge I couldn't get from textbooks. It was practical, everyday English, and it helped me become more confident in my ability to understand and communicate. Looking back, I can confidently say that conversations were the most powerful tool in my language learning journey. They allowed me to put everything I had learned into practice and to grow as a speaker. And the best part is that these conversations didn't just help me improve my English, they also helped me make new friends, learn about different cultures, and experience the world in a whole new way. So, if you're learning a new language, I encourage you to speak as much as possible. Don't be afraid of making mistakes, and don't be afraid to ask questions. Every conversation, no matter how small, is an opportunity to improve. And remember, the more you practice speaking, the more comfortable and confident you will become. Keep pushing yourself, and soon enough you'll find that speaking English feels as natural as your first language. Chapter 5: The Art of Learning Vocabulary. Hello and welcome back to my journey. So far, I've shared with you how I took the leap to move to London, how practice became the foundation of my language learning, and how conversations with others helped me become more confident in using English. In this chapter, I want to focus on something that is absolutely essential to mastering any language: vocabulary. But more specifically, I want to talk about the art of learning vocabulary, how to make it stick, how to use it effectively, and how to incorporate it into your daily life. When I first started learning English, I found vocabulary to be one of the most challenging aspects. There were so many words to remember, so many synonyms, and so many different contexts in which those words could be used. It felt overwhelming at times. I was constantly trying to memorize lists of words from my textbooks, but I wasn't really retaining them. They would slip from my memory after a few days, and I would find myself going over the same list again and again. But over time, I discovered a few key techniques that helped me master vocabulary in a way that actually worked. The first thing I learned was that simply memorizing lists of words doesn't work for long-term retention. Sure, I could memorize 20 words today, but by next week, I would have forgotten half of them. Instead of focusing on memorization alone, I began to look for ways to connect words to real-life experiences. I realized that words became much more meaningful when I could associate them with something I understood. For example, I didn't just memorize the word apple. Instead, I associated it with real experiences. The time I visited a market and bought fresh fruit, or the time I ate an apple for breakfast. These connections made the word more vivid in my mind. I could picture it, and the memory of the experience would help me recall the word later. This approach is called contextual learning, and it's incredibly effective. Instead of just memorizing a word in isolation, I started learning words in the context of real-life situations and conversations. I would use new words as soon as I could, whether it was in a sentence or while talking to someone. The more I used the word, the easier it became to remember. Another technique that really helped me was creating flashcards. At first, I was a little skeptical of flashcards because they seemed like a simple tool, but I quickly saw how powerful they could be. I started by writing the English word on one side and the meaning or a sentence using that word on the other. I would go through my flashcards every day, reviewing words I had learned and adding new ones as I encountered them in my lessons or daily life. But it wasn't just about writing down the word and its meaning. I started using different types of flashcards to make them more interactive. For example, I would write the word on one side, but on the other, I would add a picture that related to that word. Visual aids like images made the words stick better in my mind. If I was learning the word ocean, I would draw a picture of the sea or find a photo of a beach. This technique, called visual association, helped me remember words much more easily. I also made sure to categorize my flashcards. I would group words by topic, like food, travel, emotions, or work, so that I could learn words in a related context. This made it easier to remember the words because they were connected by a theme. When I studied words this way, I could recall related words together, which made my vocabulary feel more organized in my mind. Another powerful tool I used was reading. I found that one of the best ways to learn new vocabulary was to expose myself to the language as much as possible. I started reading simple books, articles, and even social media posts in English. Every time I came across a new word, I would write it down in my notebook and look up its meaning. Then, I would try to use it in a sentence, either by speaking it or writing it in my journal. Reading regularly not only helped me learn new words, but it also helped me see how those words were used in different contexts. The more I read, the more words I absorbed naturally. I also discovered that listening to English content, like podcasts, TV shows, and movies, was another great way to learn vocabulary. I would listen to a podcast while I was walking or cooking, and every time I heard a word I didn't know, I would pause and look it up. It was like having a lesson in vocabulary without even realizing it. The great thing about listening is that it helped me get used to the pronunciation of words and how they sounded in natural conversation. It was like learning vocabulary in action, as I could hear how words were used in different situations, and that helped me remember them better. But here's where the real magic happened. Using the words I learned in my own conversations. The best way to solidify new vocabulary is to use it. At first, I was hesitant to speak because I was afraid of making mistakes. But I quickly realized that speaking was the only way to make new vocabulary feel natural. Every time I learned a new word, I made it my goal to use it in conversation that day. Even if I made a mistake, it didn't matter. What mattered was that I was actively incorporating the word into my language use. The more I did this, the more those words became a part of my everyday vocabulary. In addition to speaking, I started writing with new vocabulary as well. I kept a journal where I would write about my day or my thoughts in English, making sure to use the new words I had learned. Writing helped me reinforce the words in my memory, and it also allowed me to practice the structure and grammar of the sentences. By using all of these techniques, contextual learning, flashcards, reading, listening, speaking, and writing, I began to build a solid vocabulary foundation. But the key thing I learned was that vocabulary is not just about learning a list of words. It's about making those words a part of your everyday life. The more you use them, the more they stick. Another thing I realized is that vocabulary learning is a never-ending process. Even after I had learned hundreds of words, I still found myself coming across new ones every day. The language is always evolving, and there will always be more words to learn. But that's what makes it exciting. Learning new words means that you're constantly expanding your world and your ability to express yourself. So, my advice to you is this: don't just memorize vocabulary. Make it meaningful. Use it in real-life situations. Read, listen, speak, and write as much as possible. Keep challenging yourself and keep pushing forward. Vocabulary is the building block of language, and with the right techniques, you can learn it and make it a part of who you are. Chapter 6: A Job Opportunity. Welcome back to my journey. In the previous chapters, I've shared with you the challenges and triumphs of learning English, how I took the leap to move to London, the importance of practice, and the power of conversations in helping me grow. But now, I want to tell you about something that changed my entire experience in London. a job opportunity that allowed me to put everything I had learned into action. When I first arrived in London, I knew that I wasn't just here to study English. I wanted to immerse myself in the language as much as possible. And the best way to do that was to surround myself with English in real-life situations, where I could practice speaking, listening, and interacting with people on a daily basis. But there was one thing I hadn't planned for: the need to find a job. At first, I didn't think much about getting a job. I was focused on my studies, settling into a new city, and improving my English. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that having a job would give me the perfect opportunity to practice English every day. It wasn't just about earning money. It was about using English in a professional environment, which would push me even further in my language learning journey. I started researching job opportunities, and that's when I came across a listing for a part-time position at a local cafe. The job seemed perfect. It was in a busy area of London, so I would get to interact with tourists, locals, and people from all over the world. Plus, working in a cafe meant that I would be speaking English constantly. I didn't hesitate. I applied for the job right away. The interview was my first big test. I was nervous, of course, but I was determined to do my best. The interviewer was friendly, but I still had to be on my toes. I had to make sure I used the right words, understood their questions, and responded clearly. It was challenging, but I kept reminding myself that this was a great opportunity for me to practice. When the interview was over, I felt relieved. I didn't think I had done perfectly, but I did my best. And that's when the unexpected happened. A few days later, I received a call from the cafe. I had gotten the job. The excitement I felt when I heard those words was indescribable. I had secured a job in an English-speaking environment, and this was my chance to practice and improve my language skills in real time. I knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in my journey. On my first day at work, I was both excited and nervous. I arrived at the cafe early, dressed in the uniform they provided. The cafe was small but cozy, with a steady stream of customers coming in for their morning coffee and pastries. I was introduced to my colleagues, who were all friendly and eager to help me get settled in. I was assigned to work the counter, where I would take orders, make drinks, and interact with customers. At first, it was overwhelming. I had to memorize the menu, learn how to use the coffee machine, and understand the specific phrases and expressions used in a cafe setting. But more than that, I had to speak English in a fast-paced customer service environment. The customers would come in quickly, and I had to take their orders and respond to their questions all in English. It was a lot to take in at once, but I knew this was the perfect opportunity for me to practice and improve. One of the first challenges I faced was understanding the customer's orders. In the beginning, I had trouble hearing what they were saying, especially if they spoke quickly or had a strong accent. There were moments when I would smile and nod, not completely understanding the order, but I didn't want to seem rude or confused. However, I soon realized that the best thing to do was to ask the customers to repeat their order if I didn't understand. Most of the time, they were more than willing to help, and I appreciated that. Slowly, I became more confident in taking orders and understanding the different accents. The job also gave me the chance to learn a lot of new vocabulary related to food and beverages, like different types of coffee, pastries, and ingredients. I had to memorize these words quickly, but I didn't mind because it felt like a natural part of my learning process. I also learned new phrases that are commonly used in customer service, such as, "How can I help you?" and "Would you like that to go or for here?" These were phrases I didn't learn in textbooks, but they were incredibly useful in real-life situations. As I continued working, I became more comfortable with the fast-paced environment. I started to feel more confident speaking English with the customers, and I was even able to hold brief conversations with them. Some customers would ask me where I was from, and I would tell them about my journey to London and my goal of improving my English. I also started to make friends with my colleagues. At first, I was shy and hesitant to speak with them outside of work, but over time, I found myself joining in on casual conversations. I learned so much just by talking to my coworkers about their daily lives and experiences. One of the most rewarding moments came when I received a compliment from a regular customer. She told me that she had noticed how much my English had improved since I started working at the cafe. It made me feel incredibly proud of how far I had come. It was a reminder that the effort I had put into practicing every day, whether in the classroom, in my journal, or at work, was paying off. The job also taught me more than just English. It taught me how to manage my time, how to handle stressful situations, and how to provide good customer service. I learned the importance of patience and active listening, especially when dealing with customers from different backgrounds. It was a real-world experience that helped me grow, not only as an English learner, but also as an individual. Looking back, working at the cafe was one of the best decisions I made during my time in London. It gave me the opportunity to use English in a real, practical setting. It allowed me to improve my listening and speaking skills while learning valuable vocabulary and phrases. Most importantly, it showed me that language learning is not just about studying in a classroom. It's about immersing yourself in the language, using it in your daily life, and never being afraid to make mistakes. If you're ever feeling stuck in your language learning journey, I encourage you to look for opportunities like this one. Whether it's a part-time job, volunteering, or even just striking up a conversation with someone new, real-life practice is one of the best ways to improve. It may be challenging at first, but I promise it will be worth it. In the next chapter, I'll share more about how this job experience helped me grow in ways I didn't expect. So stay tuned for more of my journey. Chapter 7: Improving Pronunciation. Hello again, and welcome back. In the last chapter, I shared how working at a cafe in London gave me the opportunity to practice my English in real-life situations. It was a great way to boost my speaking and listening skills, but there was one aspect of my language learning that I struggled with for a while: pronunciation. At first, I was so focused on building my vocabulary and improving my grammar that I didn't pay as much attention to how I was speaking. But as I continued to converse with native speakers and listen to English in everyday situations, I began to realize that pronunciation was just as important as vocabulary and grammar. After all, no matter how many words I knew or how well I understood the grammar, if I wasn't pronouncing the words correctly, people might not understand me. So, improving my pronunciation became a top priority. One of the biggest challenges I faced was understanding the sounds of English. Unlike my native language, English has certain sounds that don't exist in other languages. For example, the T sound, as in think or this, was especially difficult for me. I would sometimes pronounce it more like a T or D sound, and native speakers would have trouble understanding me. It wasn't just the th sound. I also had difficulty with vowel sounds, particularly the long and short vowel distinctions, which often caused me to mispronounce words. At first, I felt embarrassed by my pronunciation. I was afraid that people would judge me for not sounding like a native speaker. But over time, I realized that mistakes are part of the learning process, and the key to improving was practice and persistence. I also knew that I couldn't improve my pronunciation overnight. It would take time and effort, but I was willing to do whatever it took. I began by focusing on the sounds that I found most challenging. I started listening closely to how native speakers pronounced words, paying attention to the way their mouths moved and the rhythm of their speech. I would replay sentences or phrases over and over again, trying to mimic their pronunciation as closely as possible. This is when I discovered the power of a technique called shadowing. Shadowing is a technique where you listen to an audio recording or video of a native speaker and then repeat exactly what they say, trying to match their pronunciation, intonation, and rhythm as closely as possible. It might sound simple, but it's incredibly effective. The key is to listen and repeat immediately, without pausing the recording, so you're shadowing the speaker in real time. I started practicing shadowing with podcasts, YouTube videos, and even movies that I had watched before. I chose videos that were slow enough for me to follow, but I also made sure to challenge myself by using faster recordings as I became more comfortable with the technique. I would listen to a sentence, then immediately repeat it, focusing on the sounds, the stress on certain words, and the flow of the sentence. I paid attention to how native speakers emphasized certain syllables and used rising and falling intonation in their speech. I found this method to be one of the most helpful for improving my pronunciation, but shadowing wasn't enough on its own. I also realized that I needed feedback to improve my pronunciation. While shadowing helped me mimic native speakers, I needed someone to listen to me and correct my mistakes. So I started practicing with my classmates, teachers, and even language exchange partners. I would ask them for feedback on how I was pronouncing words and phrases. Sometimes they would gently correct me, telling me which sounds I was mispronouncing and offering advice on how to fix it. Other times, they would simply repeat my sentences back to me with the correct pronunciation so I could hear the difference. Another useful tool I used was online pronunciation resources. There are many websites and apps that can help with pronunciation, such as Youglish, Forvo, and Google Translate's voice feature. I would type in a word, listen to the correct pronunciation, and then practice saying it myself. Many of these resources allow you to hear how words are pronounced by native speakers from different regions, which was especially useful because I was getting exposure to various accents and ways of speaking. I also started recording myself speaking. At first it felt awkward to listen to my own voice, but it was incredibly helpful for tracking my progress. I would record myself reading short passages or speaking about different topics in English, then listen to the recordings and compare them to the native speakers I had been shadowing. This helped me identify areas where I was still making mistakes and focus my practice on those sounds or words. One day I was speaking to a customer at the cafe, and they said something that I hadn't heard before. I didn't understand them right away, so I asked them to repeat it. This time, I focused more carefully on the pronunciation, and as they repeated the phrase, I realized they had pronounced the th sound correctly, while I had been mispronouncing it. This small moment made me realize how much I had improved. By focusing on the sounds, getting feedback, and using tools to practice, my pronunciation was getting better every day. As I continued to practice, I also started to notice that people were understanding me more easily. I wasn't getting asked to repeat myself as often, and I felt more confident when I spoke. My colleagues at the cafe, who had initially struggled to understand me, now commented on how clear my English had become. It was a small victory, but it felt like a huge accomplishment. The more I worked on my pronunciation, the more confident I became in my ability to communicate effectively. Pronunciation was no longer something I avoided or feared. It was a challenge I embraced. I understood that it wasn't about sounding exactly like a native speaker. It was about being understood and speaking clearly. The goal was to find my own voice in English, one that felt natural and confident. As I continued to practice, I started to enjoy the process of refining my pronunciation and watching my progress over time. Looking back, I can honestly say that improving my pronunciation was one of the most rewarding parts of my language learning journey. It taught me that pronunciation is not just about the way words sound. It's about making sure you can be understood, building confidence, and connecting with others. So, if you're struggling with pronunciation, my advice is this: don't give up. Keep practicing, keep seeking feedback, and remember that every step forward, no matter how small, brings you closer to your goal. In the next chapter, I'll share how my pronunciation improvements helped me become more comfortable with speaking and how it opened up even more opportunities for me to connect with people. Stay tuned. Chapter 8: The Shadowing Technique. Welcome back to my journey. In the previous chapters, I've shared how I worked on improving my pronunciation and how each step led to greater confidence in my English speaking abilities. Today, I'm excited to talk about a technique that truly helped me refine my pronunciation and enhance my overall fluency in English: the shadowing technique. Now, if you've never heard of shadowing before, don't worry. By the end of this chapter, you'll understand exactly what it is, why it works, and how to incorporate it into your own language learning routine. What is shadowing? In simple terms, shadowing is a language learning technique where you listen to a native speaker and immediately repeat what they say, trying to imitate their pronunciation, rhythm, intonation, and overall speech patterns as closely as possible. It's called shadowing because you're essentially shadowing the speaker by copying them in real time. I first came across the shadowing technique when I was looking for ways to improve my pronunciation and fluency. I had already made progress, but I knew I needed something more to really take my English skills to the next level. That's when I found out that shadowing is one of the most effective ways to train your ear and mouth to produce English the way native speakers do. Why shadowing works. Shadowing works for several reasons. First and foremost, it helps with pronunciation. When you listen closely to how a native speaker pronounces words and try to imitate them, you are training your mouth and your ear to work together. This is crucial because pronunciation isn't just about knowing how a word is spelled. It's about how it's produced with your mouth and how it sounds in the flow of conversation. Second, shadowing helps improve intonation and rhythm. English, like many other languages, has its own unique rhythm and melody. Native speakers don't just say words individually. They speak in phrases and sentences, with a particular rise and fall in their voice. By shadowing, you learn to replicate this natural flow of the language, which helps make your speech sound more natural and fluid. Finally, shadowing helps with listening comprehension. As you shadow, you're not only repeating words, but you're also actively listening to the speaker's voice. This constant exposure to natural speech patterns helps you develop a better understanding of how English is spoken, which improves your ability to comprehend spoken English in everyday situations. How I started shadowing. When I first started shadowing, I didn't know where to begin. The idea of listening to someone speak and trying to immediately repeat after them seemed a bit intimidating. But I was determined to give it a try. I started with short audio clips, like podcasts and YouTube videos that were slower and clearer, so I could keep up. I began by choosing a speaker whose voice I enjoyed and whose speech was clear and easy to understand. I would listen to a sentence or a short passage, then immediately repeat it, trying to mimic the speaker's pronunciation, stress, and rhythm. I didn't worry about making mistakes at first. I just focused on repeating exactly what I heard, as accurately as possible. At first, it was difficult. I stumbled over words, I couldn't keep up, and sometimes I couldn't even understand what the speaker was saying. But I kept practicing. Every time I did shadowing, I would try to improve a little bit. I would listen to the same clip over and over again until I could repeat it without hesitating. The more I practiced, the better I got at keeping up with the speaker and matching their pronunciation and rhythm. One important thing I learned while shadowing is that it's not just about repeating the words perfectly. It's about imitating the overall flow of the language. If I didn't understand a word or couldn't pronounce it correctly, I didn't stop. I would continue repeating the rest of the sentence, and later I would go back to the difficult part and work on it until I could say it right. Finding the right material for shadowing. Choosing the right material is crucial when you're practicing shadowing. When I first started, I would use podcasts, news clips, and videos with transcripts to ensure that I understood what I was hearing. Here's what I recommend when selecting your shadowing material. Pick material that matches your level. Start with material that is a bit challenging but not overwhelming. It's important to be able to understand the main idea of what's being said, even if you don't know every single word. Over time, you can gradually move to more advanced material as you improve. Look for clear, natural speech. Choose content that is spoken slowly enough for you to follow, but not so slow that it feels unnatural. If you're just starting, podcasts, audiobooks, or videos with clear dialogue are great choices. Use subtitles or transcripts. To get the most out of shadowing, it's helpful to have access to a transcript or subtitles of what you're listening to. This way, you can read along while you listen and make sure you're getting the pronunciation and stress right. Find content that interests you. The more you enjoy the material, the easier it will be to stay motivated. Whether it's a TED Talk, a movie clip, or an interview, choose something that you find interesting and engaging. If you enjoy it, you'll want to keep coming back to it. How to practice shadowing effectively. Here's how I incorporated shadowing into my daily routine. Step by step. Listen to a short segment, around 30 seconds to 1 minute. Start by listening carefully to the speaker, paying attention to their pronunciation, intonation, and rhythm. If you don't understand everything, don't worry. Just focus on the sounds you can hear. Repeat immediately after them. Try to match the speaker as closely as possible, imitating their tone, pace, and pronunciation. Don't pause the audio. The goal is to follow along in real time. Slow down and repeat difficult sections. If you stumble over a word or can't keep up, go back and listen to the difficult part again. Listen slowly, and then repeat it. Once you're comfortable with that section, continue shadowing the rest of the segment. Focus on accuracy, then fluency. At first, it's important to focus on getting the sounds right. As you improve, try to get faster and smoother without stopping to think too much. Review and repeat. Over time, go back to previous recordings and practice again. Shadowing is most effective when you practice consistently, so make it a part of your daily routine. The results of shadowing. After a few weeks of regular shadowing practice, I started to notice some amazing changes. First, my pronunciation improved significantly. I could hear the difference in my speaking. It became clearer, and I began sounding more natural. Native speakers told me that my English was much easier to understand. and I felt more confident speaking in public or with strangers. Shadowing also helped me with fluency. As I practiced more, I became better at forming sentences without having to think too much about grammar or pronunciation. The more I shadowed, the more I was able to speak English smoothly and naturally, just like a native speaker. Most importantly, shadowing improved my listening comprehension. I started to understand more when people spoke to me, and I was able to pick up on nuances and slang that I hadn't noticed before. It was like opening a door to a deeper understanding of the language. Final thoughts. The shadowing technique was a game changer for me. It not only improved my pronunciation, but also helped me become a more confident and fluent English speaker. If you're looking to take your language skills to the next level, I highly recommend giving shadowing a try. Remember, the key is consistency. The more you practice, the more you will improve. So start small, keep pushing yourself, and soon you'll see just how powerful shadowing can be in your language learning journey. In the next chapter, I'll share more about how shadowing helped me connect with native speakers and become even more comfortable in conversations. Stay tuned. Chapter 9. Thinking Aloud. Welcome back to my journey. In the previous chapters, I've shared how I use different techniques, like shadowing, to improve my pronunciation, fluency, and listening comprehension. Today, I want to talk about a technique that helped me take my language skills even further and build confidence in my speaking abilities. Thinking aloud. Now, if you're unfamiliar with thinking aloud, it's exactly what it sounds like, speaking your thoughts out loud. You're essentially narrating your thoughts in real time. And while it might seem strange at first, I promise you, it's one of the most effective ways to practice thinking and speaking in English without overthinking every word. In this chapter, I'll explain how thinking aloud helped me improve my fluency, reduce hesitation, and think more naturally in English. What is thinking aloud? Thinking aloud is a technique where you practice speaking your thoughts as they come to you. For example, if you're walking down the street, instead of thinking, "I need to get to the store," you might say, "I'm walking to the store now. I need to pick up some milk. I wonder if there's a sale today." By saying these thoughts out loud, you're practicing speaking English in a more natural, conversational way. The idea behind thinking aloud is that it helps you internalize the language and develop fluency. Rather than translating from your native language into English in your head, thinking aloud helps you start thinking in English naturally, which is key to achieving fluency. It's like a mental workout for your speaking muscles, and just like any workout, the more you do it, the stronger and more natural your language skills become. Why thinking aloud works. Thinking aloud is a highly effective technique for several reasons. First, it helps with fluency. One of the biggest challenges I faced as a language learner was the hesitation that came with trying to think of the right words. I would often pause in conversations, searching for the correct word or the right way to phrase something. But when you start thinking aloud, you train your brain to keep the conversation going, even if you don't have the perfect words. You get used to speaking without overthinking every sentence. Second, thinking aloud helps you build confidence. In the beginning, I was always afraid of making mistakes or sounding silly when I spoke. But when I started speaking my thoughts aloud, I stopped worrying so much about being perfect. I was focused on the flow of the conversation, not on being flawless. This shift in mindset helped me feel more comfortable speaking, and over time, I became less afraid of making mistakes. Lastly, thinking aloud is a great way to improve your vocabulary and sentence structure. When you practice speaking your thoughts, you naturally start to experiment with different words and phrases. You might try using a new word you've learned or play around with a sentence structure to see how it sounds. This is a powerful way to reinforce vocabulary and grammar in real-world situations without the pressure of formal exercises. How I started thinking aloud. At first, thinking aloud felt a bit strange. I was used to thinking in my native language and silently processing everything in my head. The idea of speaking to myself in English seemed a little awkward, and I wasn't sure what others might think if they heard me. But I pushed through the discomfort because I knew that thinking aloud could be a game changer for my language learning. I started small. I would begin by narrating simple actions throughout my day. For example, when I was getting ready in the morning, I would say, "Okay, I'm going to brush my teeth now. After that, I need to pick out my clothes for the day. It looks like it's going to rain, so I'll need an umbrella." It felt silly at first, but as I continued, I noticed something interesting. I began to think more clearly in English. The words started to flow more easily, and I could feel myself becoming more comfortable with the language. The key to thinking aloud is not to worry about being perfect. You don't have to have a complete sentence or use fancy vocabulary. Just focus on getting your thoughts out in English, no matter how simple the language might be. For example, if I was cooking, I might say, "I'm chopping the onions now. I need to be careful with the knife. I'll add the onions to the pan and let them cook for a few minutes." The point is to practice the flow of speaking, not to worry about making every sentence perfect. I started to find more opportunities throughout my day to think aloud. If I was walking to the store, I'd narrate my thoughts. I'm walking to the grocery store. I need to buy some vegetables, some bread, and some eggs. I hope it's not too crowded in there today. When I was at work, I would sometimes talk to myself in English as I went about my tasks, explaining what I was doing. I'm answering emails now. I need to reply to this one about the meeting tomorrow. By thinking aloud, I was constantly reinforcing my language skills even when I wasn't actively studying. Overcoming the challenges of thinking aloud. At first, I felt a little awkward speaking to myself, but over time, I got used to it. I realized that this was my personal language practice, and no one else needed to hear it. Sometimes when I was alone, I would even walk around the house or take a stroll outside while talking to myself in English. The more I practiced, the less awkward it felt, and the more confident I became in my speaking. Another challenge I faced was choosing what to say. I didn't want to just talk randomly. I wanted to make my thinking aloud practice meaningful. So, I began to focus on topics that interested me. For example, I might talk about my plans for the day, my opinions on a recent movie I watched, or my thoughts on a book I was reading. This made the process more enjoyable and helped me learn new vocabulary related to specific topics. Sometimes I would challenge myself to think aloud on more complex topics, like explaining how to solve a problem or describing an event in detail. I found that these more challenging exercises helped me build my language skills even further, especially when I had to come up with new words and phrases on the spot. The benefits of thinking aloud. As I practiced thinking aloud every day, I started noticing some amazing improvements. First, my confidence skyrocketed. The more I spoke in English, the less afraid I was of making mistakes. I stopped focusing on perfection and started focusing on communication. I learned to relax and let the words flow naturally. Second, my fluency improved. Because I was practicing, speaking regularly, I became more accustomed to speaking without hesitation. I started to use new vocabulary and experiment with different sentence structures, which made my speech more natural and varied. I no longer had to stop and think about the correct word to use. It started coming to me more easily. Lastly, my thought process in English became quicker. Instead of translating from my native language into English, I began to think directly in English. This was a huge breakthrough because it meant I was becoming more comfortable with thinking in English in real time, which is essential for fluency. How you can start thinking aloud. If you're new to thinking aloud, Here's how I recommend you get started. Start small. Begin by narrating simple activities, like what you're doing around the house or your plans for the day. Don't worry about making mistakes or using complex sentences. Just focus on speaking in English. Choose topics that interest you. When you're ready, challenge yourself to talk about things that excite you. Whether it's a hobby, an event, or a book you're reading, talking about topics you care about will make thinking aloud more enjoyable. Make it a daily habit. The key to success with thinking aloud is consistency. Try to incorporate it into your daily routine, even if it's just for a few minutes at a time. Embrace mistakes. Don't worry about being perfect. The goal is to practice speaking, not to deliver flawless sentences. Mistakes are part of the learning process, so embrace them as opportunities to improve. Thinking aloud was one of the most transformative techniques in my language learning journey. It helped me improve my fluency, boost my confidence, and train myself to think in English without hesitation. If you're serious about becoming more fluent in English, I highly recommend you give it a try. You'll be amazed at how much it can help you. In the next chapter, I'll share how this technique helped me connect more deeply with others and use English in a variety of social situations. Stay tuned for more insights and tips on how to continue improving your language skills. Chapter 10. The Final Piece. Welcome to the final chapter of my journey, where I'll reflect on everything I've learned and how it all came together to help me become the English speaker I am today. Looking back, I can see how each step, whether it was moving to London, practicing daily, shadowing, thinking aloud, or improving my pronunciation, played a vital role in my progress. But there was one final piece that truly brought it all together: confidence. As a language learner, confidence is everything. Without confidence, it's easy to get stuck, to hesitate, and to hold yourself back from speaking, making mistakes, or pushing forward. But when you build your confidence, you start to realize that you are capable and you can communicate effectively in English, no matter how far you think you still have to go. This chapter is about how I finally broke through the barrier of self-doubt and hesitation. It's about how all the work I had done up until this point helped me realize that language learning isn't just about grammar, vocabulary, or pronunciation. It's about believing in yourself and using the language as a tool to connect with the world. The struggles of self-doubt. When I first started learning English, I was filled with self-doubt. I worried that my accent was too strong, that I would make mistakes in front of others, or that I wouldn't be understood. I focused so much on being perfect that it made me hesitant to speak. Every time I opened my mouth, I would second-guess myself. What if I mispronounced something? What if I used the wrong word? These thoughts would flood my mind, and they held me back from fully participating in conversations. It wasn't until I started using some of the techniques I've already shared with you, shadowing, thinking aloud, practicing daily, that I realized that confidence isn't something that just appears out of nowhere. It's something you have to build through action and practice. The more I practiced speaking without worrying about making mistakes, the more confident I became. And eventually, I learned that making mistakes is part of the process. It doesn't mean failure, it means progress. I had to remind myself that no one expects perfection, especially from someone who is still learning. Native speakers make mistakes. 2. What matters most is communication and the ability to convey your thoughts and ideas clearly. Once I accepted that mistakes were an inevitable and necessary part of learning, I felt freer to speak and practice. The power of practice. One of the final pieces of my language learning journey was realizing how important consistent practice is. The techniques I used, whether it was shadowing, thinking aloud, or even using vocabulary in conversations, were effective because I practiced them regularly. And when I say regularly, I mean consistently every single day. It wasn't always easy, especially on the days when I felt tired or overwhelmed by the amount of work I had to do. But I realized that practice is the key to making language a natural part of your life. At first, it was something I had to schedule into my day, but over time, it became second nature. Whether I was listening to podcasts while doing chores, shadowing a YouTube video during my lunch break, or thinking aloud while walking to the store, I kept the language present in my life every day. What helped me stay consistent was making my practice enjoyable. I found content that I loved, like listening to my favorite podcasts, watching movies, or reading books that were exciting and engaging. The more I enjoyed what I was doing, the easier it became to practice. And the more I practiced, the more I internalized the language. It didn't feel like work anymore. It became a fun part of my day. The importance of real-life communication. As much as I loved learning through books, apps, and other resources, real-life communication was where everything clicked into place for me. It's easy to practice vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation on your own, but it's when you speak with real people that you truly test your skills and see where you need to improve. I made a conscious effort to engage in conversations with native speakers whenever possible. Whether it was my colleagues at the cafe, people I met on the streets, or friends I made in London, I made sure to interact in English as much as possible. I would sometimes feel nervous, but I reminded myself that every conversation was an opportunity to learn and grow. One of the key moments for me was when I started thinking less about how I sounded and more about what I wanted to say. I learned that English is a tool for communication, not a set of rules to follow perfectly. As soon as I stopped stressing about being flawless and focused more on conveying my thoughts, I found that I could communicate much more freely. In fact, there was one particular conversation with a customer at the cafe that stands out. I had been working there for several months, and by this point, my English was much more fluent. One afternoon, a regular customer who had always been very kind to me asked me about how my English had improved. He told me that he could really see the difference. It was a small moment, but hearing those words from someone else made me realize just how far I had come. I had finally reached a place where I wasn't just speaking English. I was using it as a natural, effective tool for communication. Embracing imperfection. One of the biggest lessons I learned throughout this journey was that imperfection is okay. No one speaks perfectly all the time. Even native speakers make mistakes. The more I embraced my imperfections, the more I was able to focus on communicating effectively rather than worrying about every tiny mistake. I learned that when you embrace your mistakes as part of the process, you free yourself to speak without fear. The more I practiced, the more I realized that communication is about connection, not perfection. Each conversation I had, no matter how small or simple, was another step forward in my language learning journey. It was about progress, not perfection. The final piece. Confidence in action. The final piece of my language learning journey wasn't a specific technique or method. It was confidence. Confidence allowed me to stop overthinking every word I said and just speak. Confidence helped me engage in conversations with ease and connect with people from all over the world. It made me realize that learning a language is not just about memorizing rules and vocabulary. It's about using it, taking the leap, making mistakes, and celebrating the progress you make every day. Now, when I speak English, I do so with the knowledge that I can express myself clearly, I can communicate my ideas, and I can keep improving. I'm not afraid of making mistakes anymore because I know they're just a part of the journey. The most important thing is that I'm using English to connect, to learn, and to grow. Final words. If you're on your own language learning journey, remember this. Confidence comes with practice. Every time you speak, you're getting better. Every mistake is an opportunity to learn. Don't be afraid to make those mistakes, and don't let fear hold you back from communicating. The more you practice, the more confident you will become, and before you know it, you'll be using English as naturally as your native language. This is the end of my journey, but for you, it's just the beginning. Keep pushing forward. Keep practicing, and remember, you are capable of speaking English confidently and fluently. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. I hope my story has inspired you to keep going, no matter where you are in your own language learning path. Stay confident, stay dedicated, and keep using English every day. You've got this. Great work today. Every moment you spend practicing brings you closer to mastering your English listening and speaking skills. Remember, progress comes with patience and consistency. If this story inspired you or helped you in your learning journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Easy English Spark channel for more lessons and stories. Keep listening, keep speaking, and keep believing in your growth. I'll see you in the next video. Take care and keep shining.